Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Defenders and Lab Coats. We have entered the lab again this week, and we have brought a very special guest into our lab. Say hi to Lillian Ash Baker. Hi! Now, would you mind kind of giving us a quick introduction for our listeners and those in the lab today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you said, I am Lillian Ash Baker. I'm a senior product security engineer at the Boeing Company and Whisk Aero. I'm currently also an associate tech fellow candidate within Boeing. So, working my way through that as part of my career. So, before I started in product security, I did have 15 years in civil avionics development in various different aspects of design, test, manufacturing. My undergrad my whole education is a little bit all over the place. Undergrad in mechanical engineering, master's in electrical engineering, and most of my career throughout that time has been in systems engineering with the focus on navigation systems. Uh, Beyond that, what we're here talking about is a little bit more on the community aspects. I'm also the CFP coordinator and general chaos wrangler for the AeroSpace Village.
I think that's an understatement.
With DEF CON every year, yes, it's a little bit of an understatement.
It's always a crazy time that year. And we'll kind of get into a little bit more of your volunteer work, but I have to ask, what was your journey into cybersecurity? Because I remember checking your LinkedIn for the very first time and I was like, holy cow, like holy cow. And I'm pretty sure I went back multiple times and I'm like, I am definitely a creeper. It's okay. So I have to ask, what got you into cybersecurity?
Yeah, so that's a really, really interesting entrance. My entrance into the community was very interesting. So we'll start with 2020, which was the entrance for a lot of people into new hobbies and activities. And I was looking through some of the presentations that the Aerospace Village had posted for DEF CON 28 during safe mode. And there was one that in particular that caught my eye that I was like, oh, I really want to sit down and watch this talk. And I started watching it and I was really disappointed in the content.
Oh.
I was really disappointed because I was like, ooh, this really missed kind of the big points and big pictures of what we do in aviation development, avionics development.
Right.
And the reason for that was because I had just spent the past 4.5 years working on that system or not that particular system, but working on an ILS
Right.
receiver. So I was very intimate on the details of how you design such a receiver, all the minimum operating standards or MOPS for those systems. And so there was a lot of information that I was like, okay, this wouldn't work because it doesn't meet the MOPS. This wouldn't work because it doesn't meet the MOPS. This wouldn't work because it doesn't meet the MOPS. And so there's a lot of high level. There was no testing. It was all theoretical. It was kind of not really focused on what was the reality of how these
Right.
systems worked.
Right.
And so after that, I realized that there was really a gap in the understanding of how these civil systems work and are developed in
Right.
aviation and what this cybersecurity community sees and knows about them. And so I reached out to the Aerospace Village organizers and I said, hey, I would like to review the proposals that you get because I'd like to advance and make the Aerospace Village a little bit better with some of the talks.
Yeah.
And they came back and said, all right, you can run the CFP program. And I was like,
Wait, what?
that's not what I was expecting.
You're like, this went from 0 to 100 real fast.
Yeah, it went from 0 to 100 every year very fast.
Yes.
So DC 29 was an online only year for all the
Yeah.
talks again, right? It was hybrid mode. And that was a different environment with having to pick on people like, hey, upload your videos, upload your videos, upload your videos. DEF CON 30 was in person. So now we're doing talks in person. This is a
Yeah.
completely different realm, right?
Yeah.
And so you never really got to run the same playbook twice. 31 finally got to run it again. And last year with 32, with the creator stages, we didn't really have to manage any of that anymore. So it was kind of like half my job is now gone.
You're like, whatever.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, I'll find something else for myself to do here in the village.
Did you ever feel like that dog, there like that meme where the dog's sitting in a fire and he's, like, holding his coffee cup and he's like, "This is fine. I'm fine," and it's like it's just like herding cats.
Both in my volunteer work, but
Yeah.
also at work sometimes, especially in the throes of doing certification. That
Oh,
last about 6 months turns into a lot of like, okay, what do we need to do to get this done?
and then, like, everything's done after the week of Vegas, and you're just like, "Oh," all this free
Yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah. You just kind of like look around, like, what what should I do next? What do I want to do next?
Yes. Now, were you scared at all when you got that email back and you're just like, were you hesitant at all? Or were you just like, "Yes, I'm gonna own this."
I was definitely like, okay, let's do this.
Yes.
Let's own this. Let's get into there. And then the first year of getting all the emails and like trying to organize
Yeah.
and make sure that I had like everybody's presentations all listed out and got everything ready. Like I was super organized. And it was like as soon as we had that meeting to do the acceptances and rejections, or what
Yeah.
they don't tell you, asking for more information and clarification. So
Yeah.
you have to spend another 2 weeks trying to get responses from people. It was a lot of like, oh, there's a lot of extra work that we got to do here. There's a lot of extra stuff that we just kind of have to do that we really don't have a playbook for yet.
Yeah. So, when I know a lot of people, especially, like I feel like 2024, Cyber Camp Week was very promoted all over social media. And it was it was huge this year. Both like you saw all the good things, the bad things, and the sphere in Vegas with the giant eyeball. I think, let's be real. That's the coolest thing. But one thing I keep having people message me on LinkedIn and everything, and they're like, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting my own conference, or have you ran your own CFP? Do you know anything about CFPs?" From your perspective, kind of working on the back end, what's some advice for someone that's maybe setting up like a community driven event, like a B-sides or something?
Yeah.
How would you recommend for them to kind of, have a strong foundation going forward?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the work that Besides Vegas does
Yeah.
really shows how a good CFP program can be run, how it can be really open. I know recently Blue Team Con, same
Yeah.
deal, where they actually had a kind of a list of like, here's how we make our decisions, here's our process, listing out your process.
Yeah.
One thing that we did this past year was that we also anonymized our presenters or the submitters, so
Yeah.
that we didn't have any information beyond title and abstract, so that we could just kind of work through that. And that was kind of more of a organic homegrown thing of like, oh, let's take this from this place, let's take this from
Yeah.
this place. um, but having that makes it a lot easier so that people know what to expect, right? So if you
Absolutely.
expect responses by this date, people are going to expect responses by that date, which means that you have to be on your game and have everything scheduled out, which things will take about twice as long as what you expect because you're not having meetings every day with the people organizing. um, yeah, so it's those couple of things really make things go a lot smoother. So you definitely want to know like title, abstract. Um,
Yeah.
Besides Las Vegas and other conferences, ask for kind of an expected flow of what your presentation is going to look like. That's
Yeah.
also a fantastic way to make sure that people know exactly what they're going to be talking about and have a structure to all of that as well.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. Because you do speaking events and stuff as well,
Yes.
right? Yes.
Yes.
I don't know if you, like, ever reflect on the first time you ever submitted a CFP and got accepted. It was just like, "Oh!"
Yeah. So that was a actually very interesting. I was doing a presentation with a coworker of mine, and we submitted and we got put on the waiting list. And then all of a sudden, like a month before or month and a half before, besides Las Vegas, they said like, "Oh, we're bumping you up, like we're accepting you because someone dropped out." And we're like,
What?
"I, I guess we have to go put together a slide deck."
You're like, "This is both great and terrible."
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
very
that's
much like
awesome
that.
then. Just kinda leading on to the next question,
Yeah.
how what's your advice for maybe someone who wants to volunteer, but they don't know where to begin, right? How would you recommend for them to just find those volunteer opportunities and just really get involved with the community?
Yeah, so a lot of the villages, not just the AeroSpace Village, but a lot of
Yeah.
the villages that do organization at DEF CON or other cons throughout the country, they're always looking for volunteers. I don't
Yeah.
know of any group that really says no. So the biggest thing is reach out and say, "I'm interested,"
Yeah.
right? Beginning that conversation, because the conversation can only begin when somebody says hello. And
Right.
after that, it makes it a lot easier. But also another big thing to do is tell them what you wanna do. The big thing that I did was I came into them and said, "I wanna review the proposals that you get," which then became like, "Okay, great. We have someone that's gonna do the proposals. Here you go. Take on the proposals that someone, you can help out with either the person that's currently doing it or
Yep.
take it on yourself." Um, because if you say, "I want to help," it's hard to know what help you're offering.
Mhm.
It's hard to know what it is that you're trying to bring and offer to the team, because they don't know you. They're
Right.
not they're not gonna have that information. That and also you don't know exactly what they need, but if you come in and say like, "Hey, like, I can help you with recordings."
Yep.
Fantastic, we have someone that can help us with recordings now. We have a name associated with the task.
Yeah.
That's the big one. And by getting involved, it helps us because I've got other initiatives on the back burner in the back of my mind that I would love to get rolling. But it's like sometimes it's very hard to go do additional initiatives or other little events that you want to sponsor, but you don't have the time to do it because that was 2 months ago in the kind of uh, fog of euphoria from DEF CON, and we had much bigger ideas at that time.
You're like, "I took a nap? Wait, no, I got 2 hours of sleep this night." And people don't realize how much work goes on the back end of some of these bigger events, you know,
Yeah.
and I see all of your activity on social media and everything, and I'm just like, "When do you eat?" You know?
Sometimes it's very hard to know when I eat. It's typically right here in this space right here within my office, um, especially with work and doing other engagements. Um, another thing to do, and you spoke about it, is like
Yeah.
it's a lot of work to put on an event or to run a village to organize everything,
Oh, yeah.
and we do a lot of planning, right? So the CFP we open it up early early in the year, and we try to get it all organized for August, first week of August. So we got to work a couple months, 3, 4 months out. We're putting out calls for volunteers throughout that whole entire time. As we start to get closer, we start to whittle down that number. We start to send out more emails saying like, "Hey, are you really interested? Are you really interested?"
Yep.
Um, so we're planning all of this because we need to know how many people we have available to take on shifts to cover different areas because we have a
Yep.
bunch of activities throughout the village. Some of that might be speaking opportunities with other groups if you've been in the village for a while. So we really need to know what sort of coverage we have. It's really hard to take on volunteers when they just walk up to us at a conference and say, "Hey, I want to help," because it's like I'm sorry. We're in the middle of a conference. We're running things here. Like we don't know how to like have you help us
Right, right.
because like we've got our playbook, we've
Yep.
got our guide, we've got lists of when people are going to be
Yep.
doing what. We've got that all planned out. So we need people helping earlier in the year and that are ready and engaged. Um, and that's just part of the flow of like because every year is so different, we have
Oh,
to have
yeah.
the knowns known so that when the unknowns come, we're there ready to react.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess my last question towards like your community service and stuff, because I want to kind of deep dive into your role as product security in a minute. But
Yeah.
what do you think's the greatest benefit about being really involved in the community?
Yeah, so you get to meet all sorts of people and you get
Yeah.
to meet all sorts of individuals, not only from like the aerospace sector. You do get a lot of crossover because people will come up to me like, "Oh, I work for this company in aerospace," and it's like, "Great, sponsor us." Um, we're always looking for sponsors. Uh, but it's also being able to interact with other villages. It's people that come up to me. So I had one interaction with a college student who was interning at a national lab.
Right.
And I sat down with him because he asked me a question about gender diversity
Yep.
in aerospace. Okay,
You're
like
like
how long do you got? But it was really
You're like,
nice
"I
to
got
have
I"
that
you're like, "I
conversation.
can literally make a whole YouTube video about this."
Yeah, yeah. And it's really interesting because I had to say like it kind of depends on the era. After
Yeah.
working in the industry for such a long time, you do see shifts and changes and
Yep.
trends that happen. But it's also kind of also located co-located to the different companies that you're working with and the
Right, right.
organizations that you're working with. And so like these are these little conversations that just because I have a shirt that says
Yep.
Aerospace Village on it and everything, like people are interested to come up and ask questions about what we do. And so
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
always like a really, really nice feeling of being able to show or answer questions that people really have about the industry itself.
Yeah, I was talking about someone about this earlier, and you kinda hit the nail on the head. It's just it's so cyber in general is just so collaborative, right? Like, people will approach you, and they just wanna hear what you have to say,
Yeah,
and, like, good or bad, right? Because, I think we're probably some of the most blunt people in the world that work in this industry.
oh, absolutely.
But it's just so, like, community driven, and it's you don't get that with every field, so that's awesome, I appreciate it. Now I'm gonna
Yeah,
kinda shift
absolutely.
topics, just a little bit here, product security. Uh, I'm gonna be honest, I before, like, my current role on, like, more on the cyber defense side, I didn't know much about product security, so would you kinda mind elaborating what product security is?
Absolutely. So, product security is the development, implementation, and sustainment of a system throughout the life cycle of that system. So, this is directly related to systems engineering life cycle. I mean, you have to be familiar with that, right? So, we go through the requirements capture phase, design, implementation, test, production, delivery of a system, the sustainment of that system, which you've been working in with like SOC type work, and then also the one that doesn't really get talked about all as often is disposal. How do we take a system and dispose of it, recycle the pieces, break it down?
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of product security is very much a side or an aspect of systems engineering. So there's a
Right.
lot of um, pieces that we pull from that because we're involved in every single piece and part of it, right? So when we go to do requirements, do we need to require TPMs or any sort of crypto devices, hardware devices in our product? Is it something where we have to require certain interfaces to be turned off because we don't want extra interfaces available for attackers to have physical access to? Is it other pieces of system interactions that we need to take into consideration? But because these two teams aren't talking, we have that link in between as the systems engineering focals. So that's one aspect of the requirements, design and implementation. So, how do we do safe code or secure coding,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So, code analysis, static code analysis, dynamic code analysis. When we get into test, the product security team is responsible for refutation testing of that
Yeah.
product, right? So we do all sorts of refutation testing on it to ensure that it's secure before it goes out the door into production. But even then, when you get into production, we have to ensure that the production systems are also, or at least within my role, we're responsible for the production systems as well. So the ovens that are used in order to either cure materials or to test them over temperature, vibration testing machines, if that's required, the assembly of those components, the testing of the systems. Those are all kind of within the purview of product security. And what's really interesting about product security in the aviation sector is that this is a lot of responsibility.
Oh,
Aircraft are
yeah.
pretty big, right? And they stay around for a very, very long time. A lot of airframes are around for 20, 25, 30 years.
Okay, cool.
So,
So people that are wanting to get into product security, what would your recommendation be on maybe education path or areas that they can study in, maybe boot camps? What's something that you would suggest essentially?
yeah. So I came into product security and cybersecurity kind of from a different angle and from a different aspect. I had already been doing a lot of product development work,
Right.
right? So I had a lot of like, how do you put these things together? How do you design them? How do you test them? How do you do requirements? How do you do everything on the product development side? And then shifted over to the security side of how do we do security throughout all these aspects.
Yeah.
Um, and so one of the things that I have a lot of understanding of um, going into security, especially for the aviation sector, is the certification or the best
Right.
practices for that industry, right? So automotive industry has their own certification path. Biomedical devices have their own certification paths. ICS has their own best practices, right? Aviation's built around certification, all
Right.
of it. So if you're coming from a cybersecurity side, and we've had people interview for positions, if you're coming from the cybersecurity side, you need to know the certification aspects, right?
Right.
Just being able to say DO 356 will get you much further than a lot of other people.
Yeah.
Being able to talk about how DO 355 interacts with like ISO 27001, like we'll drop our jaws on the ground and like be very surprised because those are aspects of the job, especially in aviation, where we're deep in those standards,
Right.
and we need people to be knowledgeable of those standards. We'll get you built up on them, but if you can speak to the standards and what they actually mean for the position, that's a great way of really showing your knowledge base in the sector.
Wow.
Another piece of it that kind of touched upon is because product security is another aspect of systems engineering, understanding systems engineering, like what is a requirement? What are the
Right.
words must, shall, and should, right? What does that even mean? Uh, and and that's something that I'm kind of taking on right now internally is bringing a lot of product security engineers into the knowledge of doing systems engineering. Because a lot of
Right.
times you have to know not just the piece that you're designing and you're working with, but how it actually works with the whole system around it. And in aviation, we only speak in terms of requirements and shells, right? That's how we do things. So if you have a good grasp on the systems engineering fundamentals and can talk your way through how
Right.
systems are connected and talk to one another, and the sort of like, oh, this communications link has these issues, it can have these features. Here's, it's bandwidth limited, so this is going to not work out. That's also going to show your knowledge, not only with the work that we're doing, but
Right.
how that impacts the work that we're doing. And then there's also webinars and public summits, symposiums out there that there's recordings on people talking from those industries about these subjects and what are the challenges for the next generation, what are the current challenges,
Right.
what are the areas that they're still growing. Um, in aviation specifically, we've been doing safe code and safe system design for 40 years,
Right.
but cybersecurity has only been around for about the past 10.
Yeah.
Now that sounds like a long time, but considering that a lot of major aircraft have not been designed with any sort of these certifications in mind early on, it's very, very new. So understanding how the challenges of today from the people speaking from the development side or from the
Right.
regulatory side today, that will give you a huge leg up, and you'll also understand like how can I fit myself into this area. Because another thing I tell people is that all of your experiences are cumulative. You'll
Yeah.
bring something in from a prior position, a prior job, a prior
Yep.
lifetime that you'll see a problem crop up and you'll be able to say, "Oh, I've seen that before."
Mhm.
Not in this flavor, but I've seen that before.
Right. A lot of, like, different I call it, out of the box thinking almost,
Oh, yeah.
because you already have, like, a product that you know is gonna get pushed, but then it's just finding those key missing points to tell that bigger picture. Um, you and I both work with a lot of engineers, and they are very
Oh, yes.
literal with what is said.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. They're very literal, and one thing that's really interesting is that, like, product security, because
Yeah,
we work with other security engineers, and there's a lot of security engineers that like to either bring some bravado, or there's a lot of conversations that they like to have in order to gather more information in order
yeah,
to have a bigger picture. Um, a lot of them are working in parallel to systems engineering
yep,
teams, to safety engineering teams. Typically, security is the last one to have the conversation
yep,
because you have to have a system to be designed in order for safety to do their analysis on that system. And the safety analysis has to be done in order for security to do their analysis because they're waiting for full impacts on the system and like the
right,
whole system. So anytime that the first one makes a change, it makes a change. The second one makes a change to the third one,
yep.
and we're always sitting there last, um, right?
You're like, "We'll
And
eventually get there."
yeah, exactly, exactly. And so a lot of times the systems engineering team will have questions for us, and we're like,
I don't know.
you know, if you did that, here's what I think it would turn out to be.
Yep.
If you didn't do that, here's what I think it will turn out to be. Like it, you could choose one of these three options, and I can make a best guess as far as how we do that. But like, we're still talking about we're making a change to a system architecture here today.
Right.
It has to go through the safety analysis to see how that's affected, to see what
Yep.
the mitigation structure looks like on the other end for the security architecture. And
Then it gets to
so
security and we're just like, "Oh, we don't like any of those."
yeah, sometimes that happens too, and sometimes they're like, "Oh, we wanna make this change." It's like, "You wanna do what? Why didn't you come talk to us first?"
Oh, engineers, they'll never learn. So, what would you say is your most, I would say, favorite part about working in product security then? We kinda talked about the highlights of doing the community service part,
Yeah.
but on the technical side, what's your favorite part about it?
Yeah, so one of my absolute favorite pieces about working in product security is that I love systems engineering. Like, I
Yeah,
absolutely love the being able to take a step back and say, "Okay, here's this one system, and if you disrupt this one system, here's other 5 systems that are about to get disrupted because that data is missing or that data has been
yeah.
corrupt." Or, okay, I've got these 3 systems talking to each other, and now I'm going to disrupt this in the middle. How are you guys going to react to that? Oh, we didn't think about that. Oh, okay. So what happens if I provide data that is valid but not correct? Oh, yeah, we should probably talk about that. Or what's also really interesting with the systems I'm working on, it's not just a lot of aircraft systems are kind of OT like operational technology like systems, right?
Yeah,
Embedded systems that are purpose driven, purpose built for that piece.
yeah.
We also have an IT system that's also interoperative with it. IT OT system interactions in the middle. I feel like
Yeah.
I could probably at this point start a doctoral thesis and probably be finished with it by the time we get certification done.
Yep.
Um, and it's a very interesting piece because the two of them touch in very interesting ways that makes that translation between the teams very difficult, except for some of the cybersecurity. people because we kind of don't look at it as like system implementations.
Right.
We just kind of look at it as data flows across systems. And so that's another interesting aspect of being able to tie a lot of these conversations together. Because I've been in conversations as well where somebody says, "Oh, and this is what this team is doing." And I was like, "Not what they said last week." And it was like, "Wait, what?" It's like, "Yeah, we've been having conversations with them. They're changing how they're doing that." It's like, and a lot of that is because a lot of the systems are changing very fast because there's a lot of development going on. In how we're trying to do not necessarily implementation, but the architectures. And so it's really interesting sitting in the middle and watching all the data kind of start to flow around you. And you kind of start to see where the data goes and how
Right.
it trickles down as almost like a meta-analysis on how the actual system's going to get designed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I like it. I like it. I like all of it. I feel like you got me all passionate. I feel like I have to go watch a YouTube video on product security after this because it's not my background at all. Like, and that's why I was so excited to also have you come on because it's just like I get to learn a lot from like the podcast guests and everything. And this session is just like, whoa. So I got a couple questions, 2 more questions for you before, we're gonna leave the
Sure.
CyberSpeak Labs. The one question I have for you is what's advice that you have for our listeners? And this doesn't have to be product security related, it could just be general life advice, but what is one piece of advice that you wanna give to our listeners?
Oh gosh, I have a whole presentation I gave to some college students. I think one big thing is to always be curious, right?
Yes.
Because you never know where something's going to go,
Yes.
right? You keep your curiosity open, and you kind of start to wonder, like, why did that happen, right? If you're
Yeah.
looking at a system, um, I tell a story to some friends where, like, I once crashed a system that we are developing just by using the on-off switch.
Oh, no.
And like I could have easily walked away from the system and been like, I have no idea what that was.
Right.
Let's just not worry about it. But like I got curious. And so I just sat there starting to flip the switch and figured out like what the root cause of that was and like how it happened and everything else. Um, but it's that curiosity of like how if we did this and we did that, how would we be able to like fuse these together into something in between?
Right.
Um, I once got an award from engineering director because he did kind of a like a big ideas thing on an FPGA based system using model based development, bunch of engineering stuff, but with the explicit development games of being resilient to what are called SEUs, single event upsets, neutrons coming from space, striking, causing bit flips and everything.
Right.
And it's really interesting because like I had this whole idea and it was kind of weird and it was kind of wild and wonderful. But I would have never come to that idea without A, doing a whole bunch of work in model based development, B, doing a bunch of work in SEUs, and C, also doing some FPGA work at that time. And it was just kind of like
Right.
all three of those got merged and pushed together and it was like, oh, this is a really interesting idea of how this could work. And very
Right.
much the same way with how I got started in cybersecurity. It was like, I'm curious about this. Like this presentation, I didn't like how it went. I'd like to improve this. Like I'm very curious, like how does this process work? And sure enough, I'm in the middle of the process now.
You get the whole process.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I really like that advice, and it's so true. It doesn't matter where you are in your career. It's absolutely so true. And then my very last question for you is what's a good way for maybe a contact for you if someone has any more questions, maybe about volunteering or product security, or maybe a good source that you can give to people to start, volunteering and just kind of start making those network connections.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, that's a great place to find me in professional capacity. Otherwise, the Aerospace Village website, aerospacevillage.org, we have a volunteer link for to go to, excuse me, in the email that we have, just to get our name out there. We also have a Discord server out there where we sometimes put out like calls for everything. If you're waiting for our badge, that's the best location to also go and wait for our badge. So we'll put that link out there at some point. And then zap at aerospacevillage.org if you want to hit me through the Aerospace Village email. Um, yeah, those are about the best ways. As far as getting started in product security, it's kind of all over the place.
Yes.
Depends on the different areas that you want to go into. But I'm always willing to answer questions that anybody has about it. Um, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And obviously, thank you for sharing your journey and your passions and your insight. And I know it's definitely going to be an inspiration to at least a handful, if not many of our listeners. I'm leaving feeling very inspired. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Again, my name is Reanna Schultz. I am your podcast host here at Defenders and Lab Coats. And thank you all very much. And I look forward to seeing you all in our next episode. See ya.
Bye, everyone.